Hello, and welcome to Havoc Wargaming, dedicated to bringing you the uncommon. For those of you who haven't met me, my name is Ron, and today we're going to do an explanation and review of Dawn and Departures by Too Fat Lardies. So let's get started. So I mentioned this is going to be a review. That's not exactly the case. This is sort of an introduction. I'm working on a series of sharp practice videos and decided I would use Dawn and Departure to link these adventures together and to create the scenarios that I was going to play. Dawn and Departures, for those of you who may not be aware, is a PDF available by Too Fat Lardies for running campaign games of sharp practice. I thought as long as I was going to do the battles and put the battles up here, that I might as well talk a little bit about Dawn and Departures itself and the system for creating these campaigns. I was a little surprised and somewhat disappointed originally to find out that they were dividing their campaigns into three different basic types: a ladder campaign, a program campaign, or a narrative campaign. The ladder campaign is the type where you have a succession of battles that are fought in a linear model up or down a described campaign map. This is exactly the model of what these pint-sized campaigns for Chain of Command usually follow, and kind of what I was creating for my Arnold's Invasion of Virginia, where the battles are based on actual historic battles and create a map where each side is trying to push their opponent up or down the map. That's the ladder campaign, and they do have a system for running ladder campaigns in this book. They also have programmed campaigns. This is described as a concept where each action fought will have pre-programmed consequences. If side wins this action, they go to this next battle. If the other side wins, it may go to that battle. So the same sort of concept, but divided a little bit. However, where this book shines, and what kind of threw my project aside, because it was clearly the direction that they were going with sharp practice. And this is what I said I was a little disappointed about at first, and that is the narrative campaign. The narrative campaign is a concept where you create a more complicated map. It could be based on a real map, but you can also do it entirely random, which is what I've done for my Once Upon a Time Somewhere in Spain campaign. Basically, their system exists by taking a piece of paper. You split it into three columns across, 8 columns down, so you end up with a bunch of boxes forming the square. Basically, the important column is that middle column. That's going to be a road, and you imagine that there's a road connecting everything that's going to be on that previous column. Now, you could either, if you were converting a map like they show here, you could put 2 of the towns or hamlets from that map on either end of your new campaign map. I completely randomly created mine. There's rules in here for rolling random terrain creation, and that's what I did. You can roll on these charts for either Northern Europe, Southern Europe, or North America. I used Southern Europe because I'm basing my campaign in, as I mentioned earlier, in Spain, in the Peninsula War. So that alters a little bit the kind of things you roll. And what you roll, I'll give you an example of the kind of things. If you're following up the road, there's a column on that chart for the road areas, and there's one for adjacent areas. And the kind of thing you're going to get is wooded hills, towns, plain, cultivated land, a village, a significant building, this sort of thing. So you simply record on each of those squares, and in the end, you're going to have a map. This is my basic map. So what I've done is I've created a map. I've ended up with the Pueblo de Corda on the center column, the very top. That's going to be box 2. These boxes are all numbered, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on to 24. I left the numbers on here in mine because it's actually useful for doing the turns, handling the campaign turns. But my road goes from a small cultivated area at the very bottom up through Ciudad en el Puente, up through, and almost the middle of the map is a small town or village by the name of Capraluna, and then it ends up with the city of Pueblo del Corda, all the way at the very top. And then I rolled for what is on either side of that. So when you actually play the campaign game, you're recording the movement of your figures on that basic map. If you're moving along a road, it costs 1 campaign turn to enter into the next square. If you're moving off the main traveled route, then you have to roll. And it'll either take 1 or 2 game turns to move from one box or another. And that's representing the fact that there's less maps, there's less roads, it's more confusing, and it's trying to drive people more towards the center road. A campaign game turn in this game represents half a day movement, work, or involvement, what could be done reasonably in a half day. So each day consists of 2 game turns. The next step is to determine what your campaign background is. And again, you could have created that from a previous idea or not. If you're following something historic, it could be from that historic event. I just rolled randomly. And what I got was diplomat. The leading player, in this case, it's going to be the French. The French, with the talk of a peace move in our enemy's government, you have orders to escort a diplomatic agent to a position in enemy territory where he can meet with a contact who can escort him on further. Your mission will take you deep into enemy territory, and you must then retire southwards and leave via your friendly map edge. I changed this a little bit because I wanted to use a figure that I have. So I've turned this away from the diplomat to the spy. The French are escorting one of their exploring officers, a man by the name of Simon Barbier, to meet with another agent or an important contact somewhere in one of the top squares, 1, 2, or 3. They will not know which one is their goal until they get to the penultimate, boxes 4, 5, and 6. That's when they'll determine where their contact actually is. Their goal is to meet, get the 2 contacts together, get the information they're after, and then escort Simon back down off the table, back the way they came from their friendly edge. What I did a little wrong is I gave the secondary player a slightly different goal and objective, and that's because I rolled up the backgrounds of these 2 guys before I began. The commander of the French forces, Captain Colbert, has the full support of his commanding colonel and of the French. He's held by his side in high regard. Unfortunately, Captain Garnett of the 55th Infantry, the British commander, well, basically he has been involved in an illicit affair with the wife of another one of his officers. And that officer has spread rumors accusing him of cowardice and possibly even worse, which unfortunately for Garnett, his colonel believes. So his office, the 55th, has been assigned only to foraging to help supply the rest of the 2nd Division. That's the rules actually give him the start knowing that there's a diplomat being traveled, and I've made it a little bit harder by changing that rule. Might not have been the best of ideas. The victory conditions, of course, the French have to get their agent up to the square that they're meeting the contact, get him back down off the other side, and once they know their instructions, the British will have to stop that. The diplomat, that's only going to take so long to play on this map. And I could either make a whole new map and start over and play another one later. I could use the same main characters, or I could play in the same area. You could keep rolling and do lots of different things on your same campaign map. You might find that your players even start getting familiar with that map. And you'll start having NPCs, non-player characters, who start, maybe the priest who operates Sonora de la Ciela here, maybe that becomes somebody important to the campaign. It becomes a figure that you recognize in the game. So I think that's really neat. The scale of it also, I think, is more fitting for a game like Sharp Practice. That's where I've really come to be fond of it, is that these things are things like screening the army, escorting a lady. They're things that the smaller numbers of figures that you're using in a Sharp Practice game really make sense. And I think that's part of why they're calling it the narrative version as well, because it feels very much like a Richard Sharp novel, where you have that distinct mission that you're being ordered on that isn't just a normal large-scale military battle taking, defend this fort against the enemy's army, but rather it's this little peripheral stuff that is going on around the major battles. The scenarios tell you where you begin. It might be the table edge. It may, in the case of diplomats, for instance, the French are actually starting in box 19 along the Rio Gandia, whereas the British are starting on box 2 at Puebla del Corda. So I have 2 groups of those that come for free that I get to station together somewhere, and where I've put them is on box 11 at Cabre Luna, but I could have put them anywhere I wanted. Now, the campaign forces of the game is based on a standard unit size for a normal sharp practice game. And I've used the two armies that are listed right in the original books for the sides that we're representing, and that is the light column for the British, and then it's a standard, 4 groups of regular Voltigeur in line, and then some Voltigeur skirmishers and a group of dragoons. That list is Simon Barbaire's command. But you also get to roll like you would in a normal game of the game. You roll for points, much higher numbers than what you would have in the normal game, for campaign support options. These are people, port, extra units, cannons, whatever, that you're going to have for the entire campaign unless you lose them. I bought water carts for both sides. I bought what's called a transport cart for both sides. That helps assure that you can remove your wounded off the battlefield. That stops them from becoming prisoners and allows them to, when they heal, come back into your force. I bought a holy man for one side and a doctor for the other. I bought a lot of officers for everything. This is a game that's about command and control, and I think it's very useful to have extra leaders, and so I bought in a bunch of extra status 1 guys to help keep the shock down when things get rough. There's also introduced in this game is warning beacons, signal stations, pigeons, ways of communicating from one square to another. So real quickly, we'll talk about campaign turns. As I mentioned, they're each half-day turns. The way a turn works is the first thing you would start with as a player is your turn report. That's going to list where the main force and any detachments. You're allowed to detach as many and as often as you want, various groups to different places with different assignments. Sometimes, in fact, the random events of the game will force you to detach groups. Or then it says what the patrols and scouts that you have sent out on the last turn, what they have reported. Any events, those are the random events I was just referring to, what events may be affecting you, and how many sacks or supplies you have left. One of the things that you have to do is maintain a level of supplies. Those supplies are always traveling with your main force. The main force is defined not by necessarily where the majority of your troops are, but where your commanding officer is. And each turn costs a sack of supplies. It doesn't matter how big your army is or how scattered they are. It's 1 sack of supplies for each half-day turn. There's also things you can do like foraging in the game that can increase those supplies. Winning battles can increase those supplies because you pillage. And some of the random events will affect supplies. There's a chart then that you roll for the random event, and that'll, like I say, cause various things that can happen that'll affect the campaign. You're going to have your main force. You're going to have some detachments. They may be with, like I said, random events. They may have to escort somebody. You may want to defend a certain place, put some on outposts. The most important thing is probably patrols and scouts. An infantry patrol can always see what's in, as long as you assign a group to go out, you assign them to a direct square, one of the 3 squares directly adjacent, but only one of those. Infantry patrols go, they see what's in that square, they come back at the end of the turn. Cavalry has a little more advantage. Cavalry does the 2 adjacent on your right or left squares and the one directly above. So it can see 3 squares in that same time, but all just that are adjacent. Cavalry should be assigned, in fact, and they have a choice of battle, patrolling, screening, or reserve. So like if you sent these groups out to patrol, they're going to be patrolling and not able to participate in a battle if that suddenly takes you by surprise. It takes a full half-day turn to change their orders. And what they're doing will affect the battle in different ways. If they're actually battle cavalry, they'll be in the game. Patrolling just misses it. Screening cavalry, they cover the rear of the main force, so they'll help. If your side has to retreat or withdraw, it helps benefit you on the retreat. Reserve cavalry works exactly the opposite. It helps hurt the enemy if they're on the retreat. So now I'm just going to talk really quickly about where we are in the campaign I'm running, because that's going to be the introduction to the first battle. As I already mentioned, the French have started in Rio Gandillo. They're escorting Simon Barbiere either up to Pueblo del Cordo or one of the adjacent squares, 1, 2, or 3. Unfortunately for the British, they're not even aware that this is going on. So for the first move, the French have continued forward. They've sent their dragoons forward as patrols. They haven't really found anything, whereas the British immediately go into box 3 and start foraging. Unfortunately, the British get delayed in their movement. So they get held up. That box takes 2 days before they do some successful foraging. It's going to get worse. The next turn after that, the random event is the captain ends up sick, so they get stuck there even longer. But they will eventually go to box 3. They'll do some foraging in box 6. That's where things start getting hot, because the French have been moving up. They keep getting held up by their movement as well by moving off-road, so they finally decide to go back to the main road. They're using their dragoons as patrols. They have a better and wider area of patrol because they have dragoons. Now, I did take a exploring officer for the British, and I didn't mention this earlier, but the exploring officer works very much like infantry patrol does, but he can go out to 2 squares away. That's going to become important, because eventually what occurs, the French move back to the main road, they come up, and their dragoons discover the garrison holding Cabraluna. Luckily for the British aren't anywhere close enough to deal with Cabraluna, but their exploring officer, Winter, happens to be in Cabraluna. He's actually going to get here a turn later, but he's going to be there when the French invade Cabraluna. And that's what happens. Because they have the initiative, and because they know the outposts are there and the outposts don't know they are there, they get to pick what style of battle it's going to be. It's going to be an all-out attack, and with everything they've got except for, unfortunately for them, the dragoons that were patrolling earlier, they will be attacking these 2 garrisons at Cabraluna. I did call this a review, so I should mention a few things. To the best of my knowledge, Dawn and Departures is at present only available in PDF. That's all right, I suppose. It was bad for me because when I printed mine, I didn't really have access to a color printer. So I have printed in black and white. I don't suggest that. A lot of the maps are color-coded. Knowing what's red and what is blue is kind of important. I could go in and hand do these, or I suppose now I could just reprint the thing. But that's the only real issue I've had with it. I really do like the idea so far. I guess I can't really say how a campaign unfolds because I'm in the middle of doing the first one I've ever done. But I like the ideas it provides for. I like a lot of the things it considers. And unlike my original thought, I've really warmed up to the idea of these little encounters, these little things that become the goal of that campaign. I'm really looking forward to seeing how this unfolds. And I would suggest looking at it. I think what I'll do in the future when I do the battles is I'll talk about what's happened in the campaign turns, either just at the beginning of the battle reports or after the battle reports. I think this is fun. It's only a PDF. It's not very expensive. I really recommend that you try it. I hope that my rundown gave you some idea of how it worked. I know that it wasn't really into a lot of detail, and I skipped some of the aspects of it. If you have any questions, if you have Dawn and Departures and there's things you'd like clarified in it, or if you're thinking about buying it and you'd like to know more about how certain parts of it work to see if it's really the product you're looking for, please go ahead and put comments in the section down below, and I can do what I can to help you. It's really pretty straightforward, I think, the game, and it is brilliant. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. If you have other ideas of what you'd like to see presented as content here at Cry Havoc Wargaming, I hope you'll put those in the comments down below. We do look for that for further ideas to better help you decide how you're going to spend your money or your time in your wargaming hobby. That's what we're here for. If you have found this video useful or you've enjoyed it, I hope you'll hit like. And again, like I say, if you want to receive continued notifications so that you can see other videos like this to help with the aforementioned goals, I hope you'll hit subscribe and ring our notification bell. Until next time, cheers.